There is silence where voices ought to be. Silence in forgotten halls beneath the mountains, where memory lingers longer than stone. Greetings, my friends. I am Professor Aldrich, your guide through the hidden corners of Middle-earth. Tonight, we follow faint trails through ruined fortresses, lost records, and shadows left untouched by time. The wind carries old secrets across the wild lands of the East, and some are not yet ready to be forgotten. Come closer, and let us begin. The spring rains had passed from the western lands, and a pale sun shone through drifting clouds above the long eaves of Eriador. Along a lonely road that wound between heather-covered hills rode Gandalf the Grey upon Shadowfax's lesser kin, a sturdy horse borrowed in Bree and already weary of its master's restless journeys. The wizard traveled without haste, yet there was purpose in every mile. Few who saw him would have guessed how often his wandering feet carried him into the hidden currents of danger that moved beneath the surface of Middle-earth. To many he was merely an old man, with a weather-stained cloak, a broad hat, and a staff. Yet his keen eyes missed little, and on that day they watched every rider and every distant plume of smoke beneath the open sky. 3 days earlier, he had sat beside the hearth of a small inn near Tharbad, listening while merchants exchanged rumors over mugs of ale. Most tales had been worthless, as such tales often were. There had been complaints of poor roads, arguments over grain prices, and wild boasts of wolves larger than horses. Yet one story had caused Gandalf to lower his pipe and listen more closely. A trader newly arrived from the south had spoken of strange fires burning far beyond the settled lands, near the eastern reaches where old ruins stood forgotten by nearly all living men. He claimed that red lights had appeared night after night among broken towers, and that several travelers had vanished after attempting to investigate. At first, Gandalf had said nothing. He merely watched the fire and let the merchant continue. The man had been eager for attention and gladly supplied further details, describing armed strangers seen upon distant ridges and black banners glimpsed through mist. Most listeners dismissed the tale as nonsense. One laughed openly and accused the merchant of drinking too much wine. Yet Gandalf knew that foolish tales often concealed a fragment of truth, and it was the fragment that mattered. By the time the inn had fallen silent and the candles burned low, a familiar unease had settled in his thoughts. Now, as he rode eastward, that unease remained. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and growing grass, yet beneath those pleasant smells, he sensed something less wholesome. It was not a clear warning, nor any message that could be spoken aloud. Rather, it was the feeling of a distant shadow stirring beyond sight. Gandalf had learned long ago to respect such feelings. Many disasters had begun with signs no greater than this. Toward evening, he reached a weathered hill crowned by ancient stones. There he reined in his horse and gazed southward. The horizon stretched far and empty beneath the fading light, but movement caught his eye. A lone rider approached from the southeast, cloaked in green and gray. The stranger rode swiftly, yet carefully, pausing often to study the land behind him. Gandalf's brows rose slightly. Such habits belonged to rangers. The rider spotted him moments later and altered course. As the distance closed, Gandalf recognized the lean face beneath the hood. The man was named Halbarad, one of the Dunedain of the North, known for sharp eyes and steady judgment. Dust covered his cloak, and his horse showed signs of a long journey. When he reached the hilltop, he swung from the saddle and bowed his head in greeting. "Gandalf," he said, breathing heavily, "fortune favors me. I feared I might spend weeks searching for you." The wizard smiled faintly beneath his beard. "Then fortune has worked hard indeed, for I have spent weeks making myself difficult to find." Despite the lightness of the reply, Gandalf saw concern in the ranger's face. Halbarad glanced over the surrounding hills before speaking further. "I carry troubling news," he said quietly. "Our kinsmen have observed movements in lands where no such movements should be. Orcs travel in small companies and avoid the usual routes. Twice they have slain messengers before disappearing eastward. We followed them as far as we dared." Gandalf listened without interruption. The wind tugged at their cloaks while distant crows wheeled overhead. When Halbarad finally fell silent, the wizard's expression had grown thoughtful. "Eastward toward what?" Gandalf asked. The ranger hesitated. "Toward old ruins near the Ash Mountains. Few maps name the place now. The records of my people call it Arkanor." At that name, Gandalf's eyes narrowed. Memories stirred within him, fragments gathered from ancient scrolls and half-forgotten conversations in the libraries of Gondor. Arkanor had once been a fortress guarding remote approaches to the kingdom. It had fallen centuries before and vanished from most histories. Few living men remembered it at all. The coincidence was too great to ignore. The sun dipped lower, painting the western sky with streaks of gold and crimson. Gandalf sat upon a stone and rested both hands atop his staff. For a long moment he said nothing. Halbarad waited patiently. At last the wizard spoke. "I heard rumors of strange fires only days ago. Now you bring word of orcs traveling toward the same destination, 2 separate trails leading to one forgotten place." He shook his head slowly. "That is seldom good fortune." Night settled over the hills, and together they made camp beneath a cluster of wind-bent pines. A small fire crackled between them, its flames dancing against the darkness. Halbarad prepared a simple meal, while Gandalf filled his pipe and watched sparks drift upward toward the stars. Around them stretched the vast silence of the wild. Somewhere far away, an owl called once and then no more. The peaceful sounds only sharpened the feeling that unseen events were already unfolding beyond their sight. As they ate, Gandalf searched his memory. "Arkanor was built in the latter years of Gondor's strength," he said at length. "Not a great fortress, yet important in its day. It guarded trade roads and watched lands where enemies sometimes gathered. Then came war, plague, and the slow fading of Gondor's reach. Arkanor disappeared from the chronicles. Most assumed it was abandoned and left to ruin." He stared into the fire. Yet forgotten places often attract unwelcome attention. Halbarad nodded grimly. "My scouts found tracks near the old region. Not only orcs, men as well." The wizard looked up sharply. "What kind of men?" The ranger spread his hands. "We could not tell. The trails were carefully hidden. Whoever traveled there possessed discipline." Gandalf leaned back, considering. Orcs could be understood. They gathered wherever servants of darkness commanded them. Disciplined men were another matter. Such signs suggested planning, and planning suggested purpose. The fire burned low while the moon climbed above the trees. Sleep came slowly to Gandalf that night. More than once he woke and listened to the wind moving through the branches. Each time his thoughts returned to Arkanor. Why would orcs seek a fortress abandoned for centuries? Why would unknown men travel beside them, or at least toward the same destination? Questions gathered like storm clouds. Somewhere in the darkness lay an answer, and Gandalf suspected he would not like it. Before dawn, he rose quietly and walked beyond the camp. The eastern horizon showed only the faintest hint of silver. Cold air brushed his face as he stood alone among the hills. For a brief moment all seemed calm. Then a distant memory surfaced from the depths of his mind. Long ago, while studying neglected records in Minas Tirith, he had encountered a single reference to Arkanor. The passage had been damaged and incomplete, yet one phrase remained clear even after all those years: ashes preserved beneath the seal. At the time, it had meant nothing. Now, standing beneath the fading stars, Gandalf felt a chill that had little to do with the morning cold. He stared eastward into the gathering light and wondered what secret had slept so long beneath the ruins of Arkanor. They broke camp before sunrise and rode east beneath a sky washed pale by the coming day. Mist lay in the hollows between the hills, drifting like silent rivers through the folds of the land. Halbarad rode slightly ahead, scanning every ridge and thicket with the practiced caution of the Dunedain, while Gandalf followed at an easy pace. Neither man wasted words during the morning. The road before them was uncertain, and both understood that answers often came more readily to those who spent time listening rather than speaking. By midday, the land had changed. The rolling hills gave way to rougher country, where scattered woods clung to stony slopes and narrow streams cut winding paths through the earth. Here, signs of travelers became less common. They passed no farms and saw no shepherds. The silence possessed a different quality now, as though the wilderness itself watched intruders with patient attention. Gandalf noticed it at once. Birds still sang among the branches, yet their voices seemed distant and restrained. Near a shallow ford, Halbarad raised a hand and brought his horse to a halt. Fresh tracks marked the muddy bank. The ranger dismounted and crouched beside them. Gandalf waited while he studied the impressions with careful eyes. After several moments, Halbarad rose slowly. 3 horses, he said. No more than 2 days old. He pointed toward the eastern shore. The riders crossed here and continued toward the mountains. The wizard slid from his saddle and examined the ground himself. The tracks were deliberate. Whoever had made them had taken pains to avoid leaving obvious signs, yet not enough to fool a skilled ranger. Men? Gandalf asked. I believe so, Halbarad replied. The horses carried weight, perhaps supplies, not merchants. They traveled too cautiously. He glanced toward the distant horizon, where dark shapes marked the first outlines of rising mountains. They knew exactly where they were going. Gandalf stood silently for a moment. Then he noticed something half buried in the mud near the water's edge. Bending carefully, he retrieved it and brushed away the dirt. It was a small metal clasp from a cloak, blackened with age and tarnish. Upon its surface remained the faint outline of a seabird with outstretched wings. The wizard's expression tightened. He turned the object over in his hand several times before slipping it into his pocket. You know the symbol? Halbarad asked. Perhaps, said Gandalf. Or perhaps I merely fear that I do. The ranger waited, but the wizard offered no further explanation. Together they resumed their journey. Toward evening, they entered a narrow valley where steep walls of stone rose on either side. Ancient pines covered the slopes, their roots gripping the rocks like crooked fingers. Shadows gathered early beneath those trees. The path twisted between boulders and fallen trunks until it reached a small clearing beside a stream. There, to their surprise, they found another traveler. A dwarf sat upon a flat stone near the water, sharpening an axe. His beard was dark with streaks of iron gray, and a heavy pack rested beside him. At the sound of approaching horses, he looked up sharply. His hand moved instinctively toward the axe haft. For several heartbeats, nobody spoke. Then recognition flashed across Gandalf's face. "By Durin's beard," the dwarf exclaimed, lowering the weapon. "If it is not Gandalf the Grey himself, either fortune smiles upon me, or trouble is closer than I thought." Gandalf laughed softly. "Often both at once, Bori, son of Borin." The dwarf rose and clasped the wizard's forearm. Unlike many of his kin, Bori had spent years wandering beyond the halls of the dwarves. He possessed a scholar's curiosity and a stubborn determination that had carried him into more dangers than wisdom recommended. Gandalf had crossed paths with him several times over the years and knew him to be reliable. When introductions were complete, they shared a meal beside the stream. Darkness settled around the clearing, while the fire cast warm light across weathered faces. Bori listened carefully as Gandalf described the rumors surrounding Arkanor. The dwarf's expression grew increasingly grave. "I feared as much," he said at last. Both Gandalf and Halbarad looked at him. "You know something of this place?" the ranger asked. Bori nodded slowly. "Only fragments. I discovered references while studying records in the archives of Erebor. Most were damaged. A fortress called Arkanor appeared several times in accounts written during the reign of Gondor's kings. The strange thing was not the fortress itself. It was what people avoided saying about it." The dwarf leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Every mention stopped abruptly, as though scribes had removed sections from the records. Whole pages vanished. Names were erased. One manuscript referred to sealed chambers beneath the fortress. Another described an investigation ordered by the king himself. Then nothing. The trail simply ended. Gandalf exchanged a glance with Halbarad. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, though an incomplete one. "And what brought you here?" the wizard asked. Bori reached into his pack and withdrew a folded parchment. Age had stained it yellow, and several corners had crumbled away. Carefully, he spread it across his knees. "This." The parchment contained part of an old map. Most markings had faded beyond recognition, but one location remained visible. A circle of black ink surrounded a single name. Arkanor. "I found it hidden inside the binding of a damaged book," Bori explained. "Someone had concealed it long ago. I could not determine why. Then rumors began reaching Erebor about fires among ruins in the east. The timing seemed too convenient." For a while only, the crackling fire broke the silence. Gandalf studied the map, while his thoughts raced ahead. Someone had hidden knowledge of Arkanor. Records had been altered, entire passages removed. Such efforts required authority and purpose. Whatever secret lay beneath the ruined fortress had troubled powerful people centuries ago. The next day dawned beneath heavy clouds. A cold wind swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of stone and distant rain. The three companions continued east together. The land grew harsher with every mile. Vegetation thinned. Hills became jagged ridges. By afternoon, the first peaks of the Ash Mountains loomed ahead, dark against the sky. Near sunset, they discovered the remains of an abandoned campsite. A fire pit lay cold among a cluster of rocks. Nearby, scattered footprints marked the ground. Halbarad examined them carefully while Gandalf searched the area. Suddenly, the ranger called out. The others hurried over. Half hidden beneath loose stones lay a body. The man had been dead several days. His cloak was torn, and a deep wound crossed his chest. Yet it was not the wound that caught Gandalf's attention. Around the dead man's neck hung a silver chain bearing a black medallion. The wizard knelt beside the corpse and lifted the medallion into the fading light. Upon its surface was engraved the same seabird symbol found upon the clasp at the river. For the first time, certainty entered Gandalf's thoughts. "I know this sign," he said quietly. Halbarad watched him closely. It belonged to certain families descended from the Black Númenóreans. Most vanished long ago. A few remained in secret, serving darkness when it suited them. Gandalf released the medallion and rose slowly. If such people are involved, then this matter reaches deeper than treasure hunting or ruined fortresses. Bori frowned. Then why is this man dead? Gandalf surveyed the empty valley around them. The wind moaned through the rocks like a distant voice. "Because," he said, "someone wanted him silenced." The companions buried the body beneath a cairn of stones before continuing onward. As darkness descended, Gandalf found himself watching every shadow. The mystery of Arkanor was no longer a distant puzzle hidden in forgotten history. It had become something immediate and dangerous. Far ahead, beyond ridge after ridge of darkening mountains, a faint red glow flickered briefly against the clouds. It vanished almost at once. Yet all three had seen it. No one spoke afterward. They simply rode on through the gathering night, each carrying the same thought. The fires of Arkanor were real, and whatever waited among those ruins already knew that others were coming. The red glow did not appear again that night, yet none of the three companions forgot it. They made camp among broken rocks at the foot of a barren ridge, where the wind could not easily betray the presence of a fire. Even there, beneath blankets and cloaks, sleep came reluctantly. The mountains stood around them like dark walls, and every gust seemed to carry distant echoes from unseen valleys. Gandalf remained awake longer than the others, his staff across his knees, and his gaze fixed upon the eastern darkness. Something was drawing people to Arkanor, not merely orcs, and not merely descendants of forgotten servants of the enemy. Different hands were reaching toward the same hidden prize. At dawn, they resumed their journey. The weather had turned colder during the night. Gray clouds hung low over the peaks, brushing against jagged summits and trailing ribbons of mist through the ravines. Their path climbed steadily into rough country, where old roads had long since vanished beneath landslides and centuries of neglect. More than once they were forced to dismount and lead their horses through narrow passages between towering cliffs. The land felt abandoned, yet signs of movement appeared often enough to keep them alert. Shortly before midday, Halbarad discovered fresh tracks along a stretch of gravel beside a stream. He crouched immediately, studying them with intense concentration. Gandalf and Bori waited nearby. After several minutes, the ranger rose and pointed toward a distant slope. 6 riders, he said. Possibly 7. They passed less than a day ago. Bori frowned. Moving toward Arkanor? Without doubt. The dwarf adjusted the axe hanging at his side. I begin to dislike being behind them. So do I, Gandalf replied. The question is whether they know of one another. Too many separate groups are converging upon the same destination. The valley narrowed as the day progressed. Cliffs rose higher on either side until the sky became a strip of pale gray overhead. The silence there felt unnatural. Even the wind seemed reluctant to enter that place. Then, as they rounded a bend in the ravine, Halbarad abruptly drew his sword. Ahead of them lay another body. The dead man wore travel-stained clothing and carried no visible insignia. His horse was gone. Blood stained the rocks around him, though scavengers had not yet disturbed the corpse. Gandalf dismounted and knelt beside him. Unlike the previous victim, this man had not been killed by a blade. A black-fletched arrow protruded from his chest. "Orcs," Halbarad said grimly. The wizard examined the shaft. "Yes, but not ordinary raiders." The arrow was well made, its feathers carefully trimmed, its point forged by skilled hands. Orcs of the mountains were often brutal, but rarely disciplined. Whoever had loosed this shot belonged to a more organized force. Bori glanced uneasily towards the cliffs. "Then they are scouting ahead." "Or guarding something," Gandalf answered. They moved on with greater caution. By late afternoon, the ravine opened into a wide basin surrounded by mountains. Here the land bore unmistakable signs of ancient habitation. Crumbling walls emerged from the earth like the bones of some long-dead beast. Broken watchtowers stood upon distant ridges. Fragments of paved roads appeared and vanished beneath layers of stone and soil. Gandalf halted beside a weathered milestone that had fallen on its side centuries earlier. He brushed away moss and dirt until faded carvings became visible. "Old Gondorian work," he said quietly. Bori examined the stone. "Then we are close." Indeed they were. The ruins around them grew more frequent with every mile, yet none of these remains matched the grandeur one would expect from a fortress important enough to appear in royal records. Arkanor itself remained hidden. As evening approached, they reached the remnants of a way station overlooking a broad valley. Only portions of its walls still stood. The roof had collapsed long ago. Nevertheless, it provided shelter from the strengthening wind. While Halbarad gathered firewood, Gandalf explored the ruin. In what had once been a storage chamber, he discovered something unexpected. Beneath layers of dust lay fragments of parchment protected by a fallen stone beam. Most crumbled when touched. One survived. Carefully, he unfolded it. The writing was faded but legible. At first glance, it appeared to be part of a military report. Then his eyes found a name. Captain Vorondil. The wizard read more closely. The document described troop movements, supply shortages, and concerns regarding enemy activity beyond the eastern frontier. Yet one passage stood apart from the rest. The captain requests transfer of the sealed archives from Arkanor to Minas Tirith. Authorization denied. The sentence ended there. No explanation followed. Gandalf read it twice before folding the parchment. When he returned to the fire, Halbarad noticed the change in his expression. "What did you find?" The wizard handed him the fragment. The ranger studied it briefly. "Sealed archives." "Exactly." Bori rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "Archives worth protecting even in wartime." "Or hiding," Gandalf said. Night settled over the valley. Rain began after sunset, drumming softly against stone and filling the darkness with steady sound. The companions sat close to the fire, speaking quietly while the storm gathered strength beyond the ruined walls. "Who was Vorondil?" Halbarad asked. Gandalf stared into the flames. "A Gondorian officer, if memory serves. Not famous, not remembered among the great captains." He paused. "Yet the name appears familiar. I encountered it once in old records. Unfortunately, I cannot recall the context." The rain intensified. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then a sound drifted through the storm. A whistle. Soft, brief, deliberate. All three men froze. Another whistle answered from farther away. Halbarad was already on his feet. His sword gleamed in the firelight. Bori seized his axe. Gandalf extinguished the flames with a swift motion of his staff. Darkness swallowed the ruin. The whistles came again. closer, moving through the rain. The companions retreated silently into the shadows of the collapsed building. Outside, faint shapes emerged between the ruins scattered across the valley floor. Gandalf counted at least 8 figures, perhaps more. Their outlines were difficult to distinguish through the downpour. One carried a lantern shielded beneath a cloak. The light flashed briefly across armor. Not orc armor. Human. The strangers moved with purpose, searching. Halbarad leaned close to Gandalf. Looking for us? Perhaps. The figures spread out. 2 approached the ruined way station. The wizard felt tension settle through every muscle. He did not fear battle, yet combat here would reveal their presence to everyone in the valley. If other groups lurked nearby, secrecy remained their greatest advantage. The approaching men reached the outer wall. One spoke. His voice carried faintly through the rain. "Check inside." The accent was unfamiliar. "Not Gondorian, not Northern." The second man nodded and advanced toward the entrance. Then a horn sounded somewhere far across the valley. A harsh, guttural note. Orcish. Instantly, everything changed. The searchers stopped. Confused voices rose through the storm. Another horn answered from a different direction, followed by a third. Shouts erupted across the darkness. "They're under attack," Halbarad whispered. He was right. Black shapes burst from the rain. Orcs. Dozens of them. Arrows streaked through the night. Men cried out. Steel clashed against steel. The valley exploded into chaos within seconds. The strangers had been hunters moments earlier. Now they fought desperately for survival. Gandalf watched the battle unfold beyond the ruined walls. Orcs swarmed from hidden gullies and rock crevices, striking with frightening coordination. Whoever commanded them had planned the ambush carefully. One thing became immediately clear. The men searching the valley had not been allies of the orcs. They were rivals. And both groups were racing toward Arkanor. As screams echoed through the rain and blades flashed in the darkness, Gandalf realized the hunt for the fortress had become far deadlier than he had imagined. Whatever secret slept beneath its stones was valuable enough that enemies were now killing one another to reach it first. The battle raged across the valley beneath the driving rain. Orcs poured from the darkness in disciplined waves, striking from several directions at once. Their victims fought fiercely, forming defensive knots among the scattered ruins, but surprise had already cost them dearly. Steel rang against steel. Horses screamed somewhere beyond sight. The storm swallowed much of the noise, yet enough reached the ruined way station to reveal the violence unfolding beyond its walls. Gandalf remained motionless in the shadows, watching carefully while flashes of lightning illuminated fragments of the struggle. Halbarad crouched beside a fallen section of stonework and peered through the rain. "There are more of the men than I first thought," he whispered. "At least 20. His eyes followed the shifting battle lines. "And they are trained." Another burst of lightning revealed several armored figures rallying around a tall leader carrying a long spear. The formation held despite repeated attacks. These were no wandering treasure seekers. They had marched into the mountains expecting trouble. Bori tightened his grip upon his axe. If they survive this, they may continue toward Arkanor before us. "Perhaps," Gandalf replied, "or perhaps this battle is already serving our purpose." The dwarf glanced at him. The wizard's eyes remained fixed upon the fighting. People reveal much when pressed by fear. The rain continued for nearly an hour. Gradually, the sounds of battle shifted. The orcs lost the advantage of surprise as the men reorganized. Their leader proved capable, directing defenses with calm efficiency even amid the chaos. Gandalf observed him carefully whenever lightning exposed the battlefield. The man moved with confidence and authority. More than once, he personally entered the fighting to rescue wounded companions. Then something unexpected occurred. A horn sounded from the northern slopes. Not orcish. Not human. A clear note echoed through the storm. Immediately, the orcs began retreating. The withdrawal was orderly, not panicked. They vanished into the darkness almost as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving behind dead comrades and bewildered enemies. Within minutes, only scattered sounds remained. Rain fell. Wounded men groaned. The valley grew quiet once more. Halbarad frowned. Why withdraw when they held the advantage? Gandalf's expression darkened. Because they achieved their purpose. The ranger considered this. What purpose? The wizard looked toward the battlefield. We shall soon discover. Dawn arrived beneath low clouds and drifting fog. The storm had passed, leaving the valley cold and dripping. After careful observation, the companions descended from the way station and crossed the ruined landscape. The surviving strangers had already departed. Only the dead remained. There were many. Bodies lay among broken walls and flooded trenches. Orcs and men alike had fallen during the night. Gandalf moved silently between them, studying details that others might overlook. Weapons, armor, equipment, clues. Near the center of the battlefield, he found what he had expected. A leather satchel. It lay beside a dead officer whose armor bore the seabird emblem they had encountered before. The satchel had been slashed open during the fighting. Its contents were gone. Gandalf knelt beside it. The orcs were searching for something, he said quietly. Halbarad approached. You believe the attack was planned to seize this? Not merely this. The wizard examined the ground around the corpse. Several sets of tracks converged there. The struggle had been fierce. Someone had desperately defended the satchel before falling. Bori folded his arms. If the contents were important enough to risk such an attack, then what was inside? Gandalf stood. That is becoming the central question. They searched the battlefield further. Most discoveries offered little value. Then, among the belongings of another fallen man, Halbarad found a scrap of parchment overlooked by looters. The fragment was soaked but readable. Across its surface ran a rough sketch. At first glance, it resembled a map. The ranger carried it to Gandalf. The wizard studied the drawing for several moments. Ancient roads, mountain ridges, a river. Then, near the center, a marked location accompanied by a single word. Vault. Bori's eyes widened. A vault beneath Arkanor? Possibly. Gandalf folded the parchment and tucked it away. The discovery troubled him more than it pleased him. If rival factions already possessed maps leading toward hidden chambers, then the secret of Arkanor had not remained forgotten. Others had been searching for it long before recent rumors began spreading. The companions pressed onward. By midday, they entered higher country, where steep cliffs overlooked narrow valleys. The air carried the scent of wet stone and mountain grass. Clouds drifted low across the peaks. Several times they spotted ancient watchtowers standing upon distant ridges. Most had collapsed centuries ago. Yet even in ruin, they hinted at the strength Arkanor once possessed. Near sunset, they reached a ridge crest and halted. For the first time, they saw the fortress. Far below, nestled within a basin of black stone, rose the remains of Arkanor. Silence settled over the companions. The fortress was larger than Gandalf had imagined. Though centuries of decay had ravaged it, much still endured. Broken walls encircled a central keep. Crumbling towers rose like shattered teeth against the darkening sky. Sections of the outer defenses had collapsed entirely, yet enough remained to reveal the fortress's former grandeur. Most striking of all were the fires. Red lights flickered among the ruins. Not one, not two, many. Bori exhaled slowly. So the stories were true. Yes, Gandalf replied. His gaze swept across the fortress. Movement was visible even at this distance. Small figures passed between ruined buildings. Smoke drifted upward from several locations. Whoever occupied Arkanor had arrived in force. Halbarad studied the basin below. There must be dozens. Perhaps more. The ranger pointed toward the western side of the fortress. There. At first, Gandalf saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed a narrow path descending into the basin. Fresh tracks marked its surface. Wagons had traveled that route recently. Supplies. The occupation was organized. The wizard's concern deepened. As darkness approached, they withdrew from the ridge and established a concealed camp among boulders higher in the mountains. No fire burned that night. They spoke quietly while studying the fortress below. It appears the orcs and the men reached Arkanor before us, Bori said. Not together, Halbarad replied. I see separate camps. He was correct. Even from a distance, signs of division were visible. Fires burned in different sections of the ruins. Guards patrolled independently. No cooperation existed between the groups. Rivals. All hunting the same secret. Gandalf remained silent for a long time. His thoughts returned repeatedly to the phrase that had haunted him since leaving the western lands. Ashes preserved beneath the seal. The words carried greater weight now. Somewhere beneath Arkanor lay sealed archives, hidden vaults, and a mystery worth killing for. Orcs sought it. Men descended from the Black Númenóreans sought it. Others might be searching as well. Yet one detail continued to trouble him. If the goal was treasure, why conceal its existence so thoroughly? If the goal was a weapon, why erase records from history? The answers did not fit. Late that night, after Halbarad and Bori had fallen asleep, Gandalf climbed alone to a rocky outcrop overlooking the fortress. Cold wind tugged at his cloak. Below, the fires of Arkanor glimmered like embers scattered across a grave. Then he saw something unexpected. A lone figure emerged from the fortress. The rider traveled without escort, without hesitation. The horse followed a hidden path leading eastward into the mountains. Gandalf watched until both rider and horse vanished among the shadows. A messenger. Or perhaps a scout. Either way, the movement confirmed his suspicion. The search for Arkanor's secret was entering a new stage. Someone within the fortress had found something. And they were sending word. The rider departed Arkanor shortly after midnight, vanishing into the maze of dark ridges east of the fortress. Gandalf remained upon the rocky outcrop long after the figure disappeared from sight. The cold wind swept down from the peaks and stirred his beard, yet he scarcely noticed it. Below him, the scattered fires among the ruins burned steadily. Men and orcs occupied the same fortress, but not as allies. That much was clear. The question was what discovery had prompted a messenger to ride out under cover of darkness. Before dawn, He woke Halbarad and Bori. "We follow the rider," he said. Neither objected. Within minutes, they were moving through the gray half-light of morning. The trail proved difficult. The messenger had chosen his route carefully, avoiding obvious paths and traveling across hard ground whenever possible. Yet Halbarad's skill prevailed. Time and again he found subtle signs invisible to others: a displaced stone, a bent tuft of grass, a horseshoe mark upon exposed earth. The pursuit led them eastward through increasingly rugged terrain. Sharp ridges rose on every side. Narrow valleys twisted between them like cracks in the bones of the mountains. The sun climbed higher, but its warmth rarely reached those shadowed passages. Several times the companions lost the trail altogether, only for Halbarad to recover it farther ahead. Near midday, the ranger halted beside a steep ravine. He stopped here. Gandalf studied the ground. The horse tracks ended abruptly. "Impossible," Bori muttered. Halbarad shook his head. "Not impossible." He pointed toward a section of cliff partly concealed by hanging brush. A narrow opening lay hidden there. The entrance was little more than a crack in the stone, nearly invisible unless viewed from the proper angle. The companions approached cautiously. Inside, a tunnel descended into darkness. Fresh footprints marked the floor. "He left the horse outside and continued on foot," Halbarad said. Gandalf peered into the blackness. "So it seems." The tunnel sloped downward for some distance before widening into a natural cavern. The air inside felt cool and still. Water dripped somewhere beyond sight. Their footsteps echoed softly against ancient stone. After several minutes, they emerged into a larger chamber and immediately stopped. Someone had occupied the place recently. Blankets lay beside a cold fire pit. Supplies were stacked against one wall. Lanterns hung from iron hooks driven into the rock. But the camp was abandoned. Too abandoned. Gandalf moved carefully through the chamber. Nothing appeared damaged. No signs of struggle were visible, yet whoever had used the cave had departed in haste. Then Bori called out. The dwarf stood near the rear wall. "There is another passage." A second tunnel opened behind a cluster of stone pillars. Unlike the first, this one bore unmistakable signs of human construction. Its walls had been cut and shaped long ago. Gondorian work. The realization sent a chill through Gandalf. Arkanor's influence extended farther than anyone had suspected. The companions followed the passage. As they advanced, carvings began appearing upon the walls. Most had been damaged by time, others had been deliberately defaced. Faces were chiseled away, names erased. Bori ran his fingers across one ruined inscription. Someone worked very hard to destroy these. "Yes," Gandalf said quietly. "And yet not hard enough." The tunnel eventually opened into a circular chamber supported by stone columns. Dust covered the floor. Ancient shelves lined the walls. An archive, or what had once been one. Most of the shelves stood empty. Others contained only fragments of decayed scrolls. The messenger's trail crossed the room and continued onward. Halbarad frowned. "He came here first." "Looking for something," Gandalf replied. The wizard approached one of the shelves and examined the surviving documents. Most crumbled at the slightest touch, yet one remained partially intact. Carefully he unfolded it. The writing had faded badly. Only scattered lines could be read. Captain Vorendil, inquiry authorized. Sealed testimony. Removal forbidden by direct order. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. Testimony. Not military records. Not inventories. Witness accounts. The implications were troubling. A sudden sound interrupted his thoughts. Footsteps. Everyone froze. The noise came from deeper within the complex. Not approaching. Retreating. Someone else was here. Without a word, the companions moved after the unseen figure. The pursuit carried them through a network of corridors and chambers buried deep beneath the mountains. Much of the complex had collapsed over the centuries. Fallen stone blocked several passages. Others ended abruptly in rubble. Yet the footprints remained clear enough to follow. At last they entered a vast hall. The sight halted them instantly. Rows of stone statues lined both sides of the chamber. Gondorian soldiers, captains, officials, all carved in remarkable detail. Many had suffered damage. Heads broken, names erased, faces defaced. Yet one statue near the far end remained untouched. A man in armor stood with hands resting upon the pommel of a sword. His face bore a stern expression. Beneath the statue, a single name remained legible. Vorondil. Bori stared. The captain. Gandalf approached slowly. Something felt wrong. Not the statue itself. The surrounding floor. The dust had been disturbed recently. Someone had stood here. Perhaps many people. Then he noticed a narrow opening behind the statue. A concealed doorway. The messenger had found it. And entered. The companion slipped through the opening. Beyond lay a descending staircase. Fresh torch marks blackened the walls. The pursuit continued. The stairs ended in a chamber unlike any they had yet seen. No shelves. No statues. No records. Only a single stone table occupying the center of the room. Upon it rested an iron box. Its lid hung open. Empty. Halbarad swore quietly. "We are too late." Gandalf examined the box. Ancient dust covered most of its surface. Recent fingerprints marked the lid. Someone had opened it within the last day. What was inside? Bori asked. The wizard did not answer immediately. Something had caught his attention. Inside the box lay a folded scrap of parchment overlooked by whoever emptied it. He lifted it carefully. The parchment contained only a few lines. Yet they changed everything. For several moments, Gandalf simply stared. Then Halbarad stepped closer. "What does it say?" The wizard handed him the document. The ranger read silently. His expression hardened. Bori took the parchment next. When he finished, he looked genuinely shocked. Written in faded Gondorian script were the words, "By decree of the king, all evidence concerning the treason of Captain Vorondil shall remain sealed until judgment may be rendered." The dwarf looked up. "Treason?" Gandalf nodded slowly. At last the mystery began to take shape. Not a forgotten hero. Not a loyal captain. A traitor. The secret buried beneath Arkanor was not treasure. It was history. Dangerous history. History someone had hidden for centuries, yet before they could discuss the discovery further, another sound echoed through the chamber. Voices. Close. Very close. Not behind them. Ahead. A hidden door on the far side of the room stood slightly ajar. Light flickered beyond it. Torchlight. Someone else had reached the chamber. And from the sound of the voices, Several people were arguing fiercely about whatever had been removed from the iron box. The companions exchanged silent glances. Then Gandalf stepped toward the hidden doorway. At last they were close enough to hear the truth. Gandalf approached the half-open doorway with silent caution. The voices beyond rose and fell in sharp bursts, their words distorted by stone walls and distance. He motioned for Halbarad and Bori to remain back while he moved closer. Torchlight flickered through the narrow gap, casting restless shadows across the floor. The hidden chamber beyond seemed larger than the one they occupied. More importantly, it was occupied by people who believed themselves alone. The wizard positioned himself beside the opening and listened. "Told you the records were here." The voice belonged to a man, hard and controlled. Another answered immediately. "And half the archive is missing." "We have enough." "No, we have fragments." A brief silence followed. Then a third speaker entered the argument. "Enough to satisfy our master." That single sentence caused Gandalf's expression to darken. Master. The word carried implications he did not like. Carefully, he looked through the gap. 3 men stood around a stone table illuminated by several lanterns. Their clothing was practical and expensive, designed for travel rather than war. Each carried weapons. One wore a black cloak fastened by a silver clasp shaped like a seabird. The same symbol. The descendants of the Black Númenóreans. At last he had found them. The leader stood with his back partially turned. Though no longer young, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. A scar crossed one side of his face. His hair was dark, despite his years. More importantly, several bundles of parchment lay upon the table before him. Documents removed from the archive. The companions had arrived too late to prevent the theft. Yet perhaps not too late to understand it. The leader picked up one of the parchments. "You concern yourself with the wrong matter," he said. "The records themselves are valuable. The location is what truly matters." One of his companions frowned. "You still believe the ashes survived?" "I know they survived." The chamber fell silent. Even Gandalf felt a tightening in his chest. Ashes. The word returned again. The same word from the damaged records in Minas Tirith. The same word hidden beneath centuries of secrecy. The leader continued speaking. "Vorondil was executed before judgment could be completed. The civil unrest that followed buried the matter. Then came war, plague, and the decline of Gondor's eastern territories. The truth vanished. And the ashes?" The scarred man smiled faintly. "The king ordered them sealed." Bori shifted uneasily behind Gandalf. The dwarf clearly sensed the growing importance of the conversation. The second man crossed his arms. "Then why did the records mention a vault?" "Because Vorondil's remains were not buried." The answer surprised everyone. Even the speaker's companions seemed startled. The scarred leader tapped one of the documents. The ashes were preserved beneath Arkanor. "Why?" The man hesitated briefly. Then he answered. "Because they concealed evidence." A chill swept through Gandalf. The puzzle pieces were finally beginning to connect. Not treasure. Not weapons. Evidence. Proof hidden alongside the ashes of a dead traitor. Before the conversation could continue, a sudden crash echoed from somewhere deeper within the complex. Everyone froze. Another crash followed. Then distant shouting. The men around the table immediately reached for their weapons. "What was that?" The scarred leader cursed. Orcs! The third man looked alarmed. How could they find this place? Because somebody talked. The answer arrived with bitter certainty. Without further discussion, the men began gathering their documents. Gandalf withdrew from the doorway. "They're leaving," he whispered. Halbarad tightened his grip upon his sword. "We should stop them." "Not yet." The ranger looked surprised. "They have the records." "Perhaps." Gandalf's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "But they do not have all the answers." The shouting grew louder. Heavy footsteps echoed through the tunnels. The orcs were coming. Fast. The hidden archive erupted into chaos. Within moments, the black Númenórean agents emerged from the chamber and hurried down a side passage. They spotted Gandalf's group almost immediately. For one brief instant, both parties stared at one another. Recognition flashed across the scarred leader's face. "Gandalf?" The wizard raised an eyebrow. "Then we have met by reputation." The man smiled coldly. "More than that." Before Gandalf could respond, the sound of approaching orcs thundered through the corridors. The leader made a decision instantly. Another time. Then he and his companions vanished into the darkness. Halbarad took a step forward. "We cannot let them escape. We have a more immediate problem." The first orc appeared seconds later. Then another. Then a dozen more. They burst into the archive with weapons drawn and yellow eyes blazing in the torchlight. The leading orc barked orders in a harsh tongue. These were no ordinary mountain raiders. Their armor matched the arrows found earlier. Disciplined. Organized. Dangerous. The orc captain spotted Gandalf immediately. With a roar, he pointed his sword. The attack began. Steel flashed. Halbarad met the first charge head-on, his blade cutting down an orc before it could strike. Bori's axe smashed into another with brutal force. Gandalf raised his staff. White light burst through the chamber, momentarily blinding their attackers. Several orcs cried out. Others pressed forward regardless. The fighting became desperate. The narrow corridors prevented the orcs from overwhelming them with numbers, yet more enemies arrived every minute. The clash of weapons echoed through the ancient halls. Halbarad fought like a man possessed. Twice he was nearly surrounded. Twice Gandalf drove the attackers back with bursts of blinding light. Bori stood beside them, his axe rising and falling in deadly arcs. Still the orcs kept coming. The archive trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Then came a deeper sound. A rumble. Low at first. Growing steadily louder. Gandalf's eyes widened. The battle had awakened something. Not a creature. The mountain itself. A section of the ancient complex had become unstable. Another tremor shook the corridor. Cracks raced across nearby. Walls. The orc captain realized the danger at the same moment. His expression changed instantly. "Back!" he shouted. Neither side needed further encouragement. The fight dissolved. Orcs and companions alike retreated through separate passages, while the underground halls groaned around them. Stone crashed somewhere behind them. The ceiling began collapsing. The companions ran. Dust filled the air. Ancient supports failed one after another. Entire corridors vanished beneath falling rock. The archive that had survived for centuries was dying around them. At last they burst from the tunnel network into open air. The evening sky greeted them. Cold wind swept across the mountainside. Behind them, the hidden entrance collapsed with a thunderous roar. Stone poured down the slope. Clouds of dust billowed upward. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The mountain settled gradually into silence. The archive was gone. Buried forever. Halbarad wiped dust from his face. At least the orcs lost the records? Gandalf stared at the collapsing mountainside. No. The ranger frowned. What do you mean? The wizard's expression remained grim. The men took the important documents before the battle began. Bori cursed softly. The realization struck all three at once. The hidden archive had contained answers. Most were now inaccessible. The surviving records were in enemy hands. Night approached as they descended from the ruined mountainside. Far below, beyond ridges and valleys, the broken towers of Arkanor stood against the darkening horizon. For a long time, Gandalf remained silent. Then he spoke. The scarred man recognized me. Halbarad glanced over. You know who he is? Not yet. The wizard's eyes remained fixed upon the distant fortress. But he knows exactly what he is searching for. The wind carried smoke from Arkanor's fires. Somewhere beneath those ruins lay the final piece of the mystery. The evidence hidden with Vorondil's ashes. The proof that had frightened kings. And now multiple enemies were racing to reach it first. The hunt was no longer about discovering a secret. It was about preventing that secret from falling into the wrong hands. The following morning dawned beneath a sky of iron-gray clouds. The mountains seemed darker than before, their ridges wrapped in drifting veils of mist that concealed distant slopes and valleys. Gandalf, Halbarad, and Bori descended from the shattered archive with renewed urgency. The destruction of the underground chambers had erased countless answers, yet one truth remained clear. Whatever evidence had been hidden alongside Vorondil's ashes was still somewhere beneath Arkanor. The stolen records pointed toward it, and now every enemy in the region was moving to claim it. They traveled cautiously throughout the day, avoiding open ground whenever possible. The fortress remained visible from time to time through breaks in the mountains. Each glimpse revealed increasing activity. Smoke rose from new fires. Watchers stood upon ruined towers. Even at a distance, Arkanor seemed restless. News of the archive's collapse had likely spread among those searching the ruins. Near midday, Halbarad raised a hand and motioned for silence. The ranger had spotted movement below a rocky escarpment. Together they crept forward and peered into a narrow valley. A column of orcs marched along the valley floor. There were more than 40. Unlike the scattered bands often encountered in the wild, these warriors moved in disciplined ranks. They carried supplies, tools, and several heavy chests strapped to pack animals. At their center rode a large orc captain clad in dark armor. Bori frowned. That is no raiding party. No, Gandalf agreed. It is a work detail. The dwarf looked puzzled. A work detail? The wizard watched the column carefully. They are transporting equipment, digging tools, ropes, supports. His expression hardened. Someone is excavating beneath the fortress. The implications were obvious. The search had narrowed. The orcs knew approximately where to look. As the column disappeared into the distance, Gandalf considered everything they had learned. Hidden archives, sealed testimony, preserved ashes, excavation crews. The pieces finally seemed to align around a single conclusion. Vorundil's remains were not important. What accompanied them was. That was why the king's decree had focused on preserving evidence. The ashes merely marked the location. By evening, they reached a ridge overlooking Arkanor itself. From there, they could observe the fortress in greater detail than ever before. The ruins sprawled across a broad basin surrounded by black stone cliffs. Time had shattered much of the outer wall. Towers leaned precariously. Entire sections had collapsed into heaps of rubble. Yet beneath the decay lingered unmistakable strength. Arkanor had once been a formidable fortress. More importantly, activity now centered around the keep. Workers moved constantly between tents and excavation sites. Fires burned beside newly opened trenches. Wagons carried stone away from the central courtyard. Someone had found something. Halbarad studied the scene through narrowed eyes. There. He pointed towards the keep. A large section of flooring had been removed within the ruined courtyard. Wooden scaffolding surrounded the opening. Guards stood watch nearby. Bori let out a low whistle. They have already begun digging. Gandalf nodded. And quickly. The wizard spent nearly an hour observing movements within the fortress. Patterns emerged gradually. Orcs occupied the eastern ruins. The Black Númenórean faction controlled portions of the western side. Tension between them remained obvious. Separate patrols avoided one another whenever possible. Yet neither group attacked openly. Not yet. Both feared losing time. The race for the hidden vault had become too important. As darkness approached, the companions descended toward the fortress. They could not remain observers any longer. The hidden evidence had to be secured before either faction reached it. The approach proved difficult. Numerous sentries watched the surrounding terrain. Twice the companions were forced to hide while patrols passed nearby. Eventually, they reached a collapsed section of the outer wall where centuries of erosion had created a concealed entry. One by one, they slipped inside. The ruins felt strangely alive. Voices echoed through broken streets. Lanterns swung from ancient arches. Armed guards moved between crumbling buildings. The fortress resembled an occupied city more than an abandoned stronghold. Keeping to the shadows, the companions advanced toward the central keep. Several times they overheard conversations. Most revealed little. Then fortune favored them. Two men wearing the seabird emblem paused beside a ruined fountain only a short distance away. The excavation reached another chamber. The first speaker sounded excited. The second looked nervous. And? Nothing. The reply carried obvious frustration. Another dead end. The nervous man glanced around before lowering his voice. Our leader grows impatient. He is not the only one. The first man spat into the dust. The orcs found something yesterday. That captured Gandalf's full attention. What? A sealed passage. The second man stiffened. To the vault? No one knows. The conversation ended as both men continued on their way. Gandalf exchanged a glance with Halbarad. The sealed passage. That was the key. The companions continued deeper into the ruins. The keep towered above them now. Though damaged, much of its central structure remained intact. Excavation work had transformed the surrounding courtyard into a maze of trenches, scaffolding, and temporary structures. From concealment behind a collapsed wall, they studied the operation. Workers moved constantly between the dig site and nearby tents. Guards patrolled every approach. Then Gandalf noticed something unexpected. A familiar face emerged from one of the tents. The scarred leader. The man from the archive. He strode across the courtyard with obvious authority. Several subordinates followed close behind. The companions watched as he approached the excavation itself. A heated argument immediately began. The other participant was not human. The orc captain. Even at a distance, the hostility between them was unmistakable. Neither trusted the other. Neither intended to share whatever lay beneath the fortress. Bori shook his head. They will kill each other eventually. Certainly, Gandalf replied. The question is, when? The argument ended abruptly when a runner arrived. The messenger appeared exhausted. He spoke rapidly. The scarred leader's expression changed instantly. Without hesitation, he followed the runner toward the western ruins. The orc captain watched him depart, then smiled. A dangerous smile. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. Something significant had happened. The companions decided to follow. Maintaining concealment, they trailed the messenger and his master through winding streets and collapsed buildings. Eventually, they reached a partially ruined chapel attached to the fortress wall. The structure appeared abandoned, yet guards surrounded it. Many guards. The scarred leader entered immediately. After waiting several minutes, Gandalf moved closer. Through a broken window, he glimpsed the interior. The sight startled him. A tomb. Ancient stone sarcophagi filled the chapel. Several had been opened recently. Workers moved among them carrying lanterns and tools. At the center of the chamber stood a newly uncovered crypt. Its stone lid had been pushed aside. Excitement spread through everyone present. The scarred leader stepped forward. One of the workers handed him an object. A scroll case. Old. Dust-covered. Sealed. For a brief moment, triumph flashed across the man's face. Then he opened it. His expression changed immediately. Confusion. Disbelief. Rage. With a violent motion, he hurled the case across the crypt. It struck the wall and shattered. The workers recoiled. The leader's voice echoed through the chapel. Empty. Silence followed. One of the workers gathered enough courage to speak. Perhaps another tomb? No. The scarred man cut him off sharply. Someone reached this place before us. Gandalf felt a chill. The vault beneath Arkanor was not the only hidden location. Multiple caches existed throughout the fortress, and someone had already begun removing their contents. The question was, who? As the companions withdrew from the chapel, another possibility occurred to him. Perhaps the race for the evidence had begun long before any of them arrived. Perhaps a third player already possessed part of the truth. And if so, that player remained unseen. Late that night, concealed among the upper ruins overlooking the keep, Gandalf sat awake while the others rested. Below, lanterns moved through Arkanor's streets like wandering stars. The fortress felt tense, unstable, close to violence. Every faction searching its ruins had grown desperate. Sooner or later, patience would fail. Then bloodshed would follow. As he watched the lights below, a small movement caught his attention. A solitary figure emerged from the excavation site beneath the keep. Unlike the workers, this person traveled alone. Unlike the guards, this person moved carefully, secretly. The figure carried a bundle beneath one arm. Then, without warning, it vanished into a concealed opening near the foundations. Gandalf leaned forward. The opening disappeared moments later behind shifting stone. A hidden passage. One not marked upon any map. And perhaps at last a path leading directly toward the truth buried beneath Arkanor. Gandalf remained motionless long after the hidden passage vanished from sight. Below him, the lanterns of Arkanor flickered in the darkness, while cold wind swept across the ruined heights. The solitary figure had emerged from the excavation, carried something away in secret, and disappeared into a concealed route unknown to the others. That was no coincidence. Someone within the fortress had found more than they were willing to reveal. As the night deepened, the wizard considered his next move carefully. By dawn, the race for Arkanor's secret would likely reach its final stage. He woke Halbarad and Bori before first light. "There is another passage beneath the keep," he told them quietly, one hidden even from those conducting the excavation. The ranger sat up immediately. "You are certain?" "I watched someone use it." Bori rubbed sleep from his eyes. "Then why wait until morning?" Gandalf's gaze drifted toward the dark silhouette of the keep. "Because whoever entered that passage may still be inside. If we move carelessly, we risk walking into a trap." The first gray light of dawn spread across the mountains. Activity resumed throughout the fortress almost immediately. Workers returned to the excavation. Patrols changed shifts. Orders echoed through ruined streets. Amid the confusion, the companions slipped from their hiding place and descended toward the foundations of the keep. The concealed entrance proved difficult to locate. More than once they believed they had found it, only to discover nothing but collapsed stone. At last, Halbarad noticed a narrow crack hidden behind a fallen pillar. Fresh scuff marks stained the surrounding rock. Someone had passed through recently. "This is it." The opening barely allowed a man to squeeze through sideways. Beyond it lay a descending passage no wider than a corridor. Unlike the tunnels beneath the archive, these walls showed little sign of age. Dust covered the floor, yet the stone itself appeared remarkably intact. Bori frowned. "This was sealed deliberately." "Yes," Gandalf replied. "And very carefully." The passage descended deeper than expected. Several times it branched. Each choice seemed designed to confuse intruders. Yet subtle clues guided them onward. Footprints, scrape marks, disturbed dust. Someone had traveled this route repeatedly. Eventually, the corridor opened into a circular chamber supported by thick pillars. The room contained no furniture, no inscriptions, no obvious purpose. Yet something felt wrong. Halbarad moved cautiously around the perimeter. Then he stopped. There. A section of wall bore faint carvings almost invisible beneath layers of grime. Gandalf approached. The markings depicted ships, towers, a crown. Then, near the center, a kneeling man offering a sealed document to a dark figure whose face had been deliberately removed. The wizard's expression hardened. "Not decoration," he murmured. "History." Bori studied the image. "What does it mean?" Gandalf traced part of the carving with one finger. "Treachery." The answer settled heavily in the chamber. Before anyone could speak further, a voice echoed from beyond a nearby archway. "You understand more than most." All three companions spun toward the sound. A man stepped into view. Tall, gray-haired, clad in travel-worn clothing. For a moment, nobody moved. Then recognition dawned. It was the rider, the one Gandalf had seen leaving Arkanor days earlier. The stranger raised empty hands. "I have no desire to fight." Halbarad kept his sword ready. "Then explain yourself." The man nodded slowly. "My name is Baranor. I was once a scholar in Minas Tirith." Gandalf studied him closely. The name meant nothing. Yet the man's face carried genuine exhaustion. His eyes revealed weeks of strain. "You removed records from the tombs," the wizard said. Baranor sighed. "Some." "Why?" The scholar hesitated. Then he answered. "To keep them from the wrong hands." A bitter laugh escaped Bori. "You have many competitors in that effort." Baranor's expression darkened. "You have no idea." The scholar led them deeper into the hidden complex. As they walked, he explained. Years earlier, he had discovered references to Arkanor while studying neglected records. Unlike others, he had followed every clue. The trail eventually revealed the truth behind Captain Vorondil. The captain had indeed committed treason. Not against Gondor, against Sauron. The revelation struck like a hammer. Everyone stopped. "What?" Halbarad asked. Baranor nodded grimly. The official records lied. Gandalf felt his pulse quicken. The king's decree was part of the deception. The scholar continued walking. The public version claimed Vorondil betrayed Gondor. The reality was more complicated. They entered another chamber. This one contained shelves of stone boxes. Hundreds of them. Many stood open. Baranor selected a document and handed it to Gandalf. The wizard read quickly. Each line deepened his astonishment. Years before Arkanor's fall, Sauron's agents had infiltrated parts of Gondor's eastern frontier. One of those agents had been exposed by Captain Vorondil. The captain gathered evidence. Names. Meetings. Correspondence. Proof of a hidden network. Before he could deliver the information, powerful figures intervened. The investigation vanished. The records were sealed. Vorondil died soon afterward. Bori stared in disbelief. They condemned an innocent man? To preserve stability, Baranor said bitterly. The truth implicated nobles, commanders, and officials across multiple provinces. Public exposure could have triggered civil conflict during wartime. Gandalf lowered the document slowly. At last, everything made sense. The erased records, the hidden archives, the preserved ashes. The king had buried the truth because revealing it threatened the realm itself. Yet another question remained. If Vorondil was innocent, Gandalf said, why are Sauron's servants searching for the evidence now? Baranor's face tightened. Because the evidence still exists. The scholar pointed toward a sealed stone door at the far end of the chamber. Behind that. Silence followed. The door stood enormous and ancient. No one had opened it. Not yet. The final vault, Gandalf said. Baranor nodded. Vorondil's ashes are inside. And the evidence. Yes. Before anyone could move, a distant crash echoed through the hidden complex. Everyone froze. Another crash followed. Louder. Closer. Baranor closed his eyes briefly. They found the entrance. The scholar's voice carried quiet despair. We've run out of time. Shouts echoed faintly through the tunnels. Human voices? Orc voices? Both. The rivals had discovered the hidden route. Now they were coming. Fast. The companions hurried towards the vault door. Arkanor produced an iron key from inside his cloak. Ancient. Heavy. Tarnished with age. His hands trembled as he inserted it into the lock. The mechanism resisted. Then turned. A deep rumble echoed through the chamber. The massive door began to open. At that exact moment, distant screams erupted from the tunnels behind them. The factions had encountered one another. The battle for Arkanor had finally begun. Steel clashed. Orders rang out. The noise grew rapidly louder. Neither side cared about secrecy any longer. They cared only about reaching the vault first. The stone door swung inward. Darkness waited beyond. Cold air flowed outward from a chamber untouched for centuries. Gandalf stepped forward. Behind him, the sounds of approaching battle thundered through the hidden halls. Ahead lay Vorondil's resting place, and the secret for which so many had already died. Cold air poured from the opened vault, carrying the scent of ancient stone and centuries of undisturbed dust. Gandalf stepped across the threshold first, his staff casting pale light into the darkness. Behind him came Halbarad, Bori, and Arkanor, while far beyond the chamber the sounds of battle echoed through the hidden passages. Steel rang against steel. Orcs shouted in their harsh tongues. Men answered with curses and commands. The struggle for Arkanor had reached its climax, and every surviving faction was converging upon the same destination. The vault was larger than any of them expected. Massive pillars supported a domed ceiling carved with the symbols of Gondor's ancient kings. Unlike the ruined chambers above, this place had survived almost untouched. Rows of stone chests lined the walls. Bronze lamps, long extinguished, hung from chains overhead. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform. Upon it rested a black stone casket covered in dust, but otherwise unharmed by time. Arkanor stopped several paces from it. There. No one needed to ask what he meant. The casket dominated the room. Generations had passed while kingdoms rose and declined, yet this final resting place had remained sealed beneath the mountain. Gandalf approached slowly. Ancient letters had been carved into the lid. Most remained perfectly preserved. Captain Vorondil, Keeper of the Eastern Marches. The inscription continued. His service concealed, his judgment deferred. Bori let out a low breath. Even here they could not bring themselves to write the truth. No, Gandalf replied, but neither could they destroy it. The wizard examined the platform more closely. Several iron boxes surrounded the casket. Unlike the archives above, these containers appeared untouched. Dust lay thick upon every surface. No thief had reached them. No investigator had opened them. Whatever evidence remained had survived exactly as the king's decree intended. Halbarad knelt beside one of the boxes. The seals are intact. Arkanor closed his eyes briefly. Then the records still exist. Hope flickered across his weary face for the first time. Yet their moment of relief lasted only seconds. A distant roar echoed through the vault entrance. Then came another. Closer. The battle was approaching rapidly. "We have little time," Gandalf said. Together they began opening the containers. Inside lay bundles of parchment wrapped in oilcloth. The preservation was remarkable. One by one they examined the contents. Letters, testimonies, reports, names, dates, meetings between Gondorian officials and servants of the enemy, evidence of corruption stretching across years. Bori shook his head as he read. Enough to condemn dozens. More than dozens, Baranor answered. His voice carried equal parts satisfaction and sorrow. Entire networks. The scholar carefully sorted documents into separate piles. Some concerned local officials. Others implicated military officers. Several referenced agents operating far beyond Arkanor itself. The conspiracy had been larger than anyone imagined. Then Gandalf found something that caused him to pause. A sealed letter. Unlike the others, it bore the mark of a king. Carefully, he opened it. The contents explained everything. For several moments, he read silently. Then he handed the letter to Halbarad. The ranger's expression changed as he reached the final lines. So that was the reason. Bori took the letter next. The king himself had ordered the deception. Not to protect traitors. To protect Gondor. The evidence implicated so many powerful figures that public trials would likely have shattered the eastern provinces during a time of growing war. Rather than risk civil collapse, the king had chosen secrecy. The guilty were removed quietly where possible. Others vanished. The records were sealed. A flawed decision. Yet not a malicious one. Gandalf understood it immediately. History often forced rulers to choose between terrible options. The wizard looked toward Verandil's casket. In the end, he said quietly, he sacrificed his reputation to preserve the realm he served. Baranor nodded. And no one remembered. Before further discussion could follow, the battle reached the vault. A scream echoed through the entrance corridor. Then armed figures burst into the chamber. The first were orcs. Bloodied. Exhausted. Desperate. Behind them came men bearing the seabird emblem. The scarred leader strode among them. His face lit with triumph when he saw the opened vault. At last, the final confrontation had arrived. For several seconds, nobody moved. The two rival groups stared across the chamber. Then the scarred man noticed the documents. His expression hardened instantly. So, his gaze settled upon Gandalf. You reached them first. The wizard stepped between the records and the newcomers. Far enough. The leader laughed softly. I did not come this far to leave empty-handed. The orc captain snarled something from the opposite side of the chamber. Whatever fragile restraint had existed between the factions vanished immediately. Weapons rose. Tempers broke. Then everything erupted at once. The orcs charged. The men met them. Battle consumed the vault. Steel flashed beneath the ancient ceiling. Warriors crashed against one another between the pillars. The scarred leader fought his way forward, determined to reach the records. The orc captain pursued the same goal from another direction. Neither cared about allies anymore. Neither trusted anyone. Halbarad entered the struggle without hesitation. His sword drove back attackers who came too close to the documents. Bori fought beside him, his axe striking with devastating force. Baranor gathered as many records as possible, dragging them away from the fighting. Gandalf stood at the center. His staff blazed with white fire. Light burst across the chamber. Several combatants staggered backward, shielding their eyes. Still, the battle continued. More enemies poured through the entrance. The vault shook with violence. Then a familiar rumble echoed through the floor. Gandalf felt it instantly. The mountain again. The fighting. The excavation. The collapsed archives. Together they had weakened Arkanor beyond endurance. Cracks appeared along the ceiling. Dust rained downward. The wizard's eyes widened. The fortress is failing. No one listened. The struggle had become too fierce. Another tremor struck. A massive crack split one of the pillars. Stone crashed to the floor. At last, panic spread through the combatants. The orc captain looked upward. The scarred leader did the same. Both realized the danger simultaneously. Yet even then, neither abandoned the records. Greed held them fast. The next collapse came without warning. Part of the ceiling gave way. Stone thundered downward. Several warriors vanished beneath the debris. Screams echoed through the vault. Now survival finally outweighed ambition. The battle dissolved instantly. Orcs fled. Men fled. Everyone rushed toward the exits. Everyone except the scarred leader. He lunged toward the records one final time. One desperate attempt. One fatal mistake. The ceiling collapsed above him. Stone engulfed him completely. His pursuit ended there. Gandalf seized a bundle of documents and turned toward the others. Go! They ran. The vault disintegrated behind them. Corridors collapsed. Ancient walls shattered. The mountain roared around them like an awakening giant. At last they burst into the open air. The ruins of Arkanor stretched beneath a darkening sky. Then the fortress began to die. Towers crumbled. Walls split apart. Entire sections of the keep vanished into clouds of dust. The ground trembled continuously. For several long minutes, the destruction continued. Then, gradually, silence returned. Where the hidden chambers had once existed, only heaps of broken stone remained. Arkanor was gone. The fortress had survived centuries of war and neglect. Yet its final secret had brought about its end. As dusk settled across the mountains, the survivors gathered upon a ridge overlooking the ruins. Baranor held the rescued records carefully. Years of searching had finally borne fruit. The truth had survived. Not all of it, but enough. Far below, smoke drifted from the shattered remains of the fortress. Halbarad watched quietly. What happens now? Gandalf looked toward the west. The truth will be preserved. The wind stirred his cloak. Not hidden, not forgotten. Bori glanced toward the ruins. And Vorondil? For a moment the wizard said nothing. His gaze lingered upon the broken stones beneath which the captain's ashes now rested forever. His enemies failed, Gandalf said at last. His king failed him. History failed him. Yet in the end, the truth endured. Night settled slowly over the mountains. One by one, the first stars appeared above Middle-earth. The companions turned westward and began the long journey home. Behind them remained only the ashes of Arkanor, scattered beneath ruined stone and silent skies. The fortress was gone. The secret was no longer buried. And in the hidden war against the shadow, another small victory had been won.
Привітик. Хочу трошки поаналізувати те, що я хотів подати вам відео. Дивіться, скільки речей ми знаємо про минуле. Лише тому, що хтось колись відмовився мовчати. Нам часто здається, що історію зберігають королі, літописи чи великі перемоги. Ні. Якщо правильно там трошечки придивитися уважніше, то дуже багато пам'яті тримається на одній людині, яка не погодилася забути. На комусь, хто продовжив шукати відповіді, навіть коли вже ніхто про це не цікавився. Час має таку якусь дивну силу, він стирає обличчя, руйнує міста, змішує правду з чутками. І все ж іноді знаходиться хтось, хто піднімає старий камінь, відкриває забутий запис або просто ставить запитання, яке інші давно перестали ставити. Мені здається, багато історій пережили століття не тому, що були якимись там дуже важливими, а тому, що для когось вони були просто цінними, або це для нього було цінно, і він просто не дозволив їм зникнути. І, можливо, пам'ять людства складається саме таких рішень. Не забути, не відвернутися, не дозволити темряві остаточно закрити очі. Тому, дивіться, люди, просто намагаємось тримати пам'ять, намагаємось зберігати свої якісь історії, зберігати пам'ять про близьких, якісь речі, передавати їх наступним, розповідати, ділитись, бо це ми пишемо історію. Тому я дуже радий, що я маю зараз можливість там якісь писати, для вас щось створювати, виставляти зараз такий світ, що це можна просто виставити в інтернеті, і ви це все послухаєте. Я радий, що маю змогу творити якісь такі, знаєте, як це каже, як фанат для фанатів. Так що всім, хто любить Всесвіт Толкіна, цей просто офігенний легендаріум, залишаємось на каналі, підписуємось, дивимося наступні відео і обов'язково коментуємо.